Driver, hands out the window, now!
Officer, my hands are visible. I am informing you. It is holstered on my hip. Do not discharge your weapon!
Shut your mouth. Get out, or I will drop you right here.
Get on the ground! Eat asphalt, dirtbag!
This body cam footage was recorded on a sweltering Thursday afternoon, July 14th, at 3:15 p.m. It captures the exact moment a routine traffic stop in St. Louis turned into a constitutional crisis, pitting a decorated veteran of the FBI against a police sergeant whose badge had been tarnished for decades. Sergeant Rick "Bulldog" Harris was a 23-year veteran of the force. To the casual observer, his uniform was crisp, his boots polished to a mirror shine, and his service record appeared lengthy. But within the department, and specifically within the Internal Affairs Bureau, Harris's file was a heavy, leather-bound testament to systemic failure. Over 23 years, Harris had accumulated 31 formal complaints. 27 of them alleged excessive use of force. 24 of them involved minority motorists stopped in transitional neighborhoods. The pattern was undeniable, yet studiously ignored. In 2015, he tackled a 19-year-old college student for aggressive jaywalking, resulting in a dislocated shoulder. The department ruled it within policy. In 2018, he pepper-sprayed a grandfather who was too slow to retrieve his registration due to arthritis. Harris cited non-compliance. In 2021, he held a local surgeon at gunpoint for 20 minutes because his luxury SUV looked suspicious. Each complaint ended the same way: mandatory retraining that Harris attended but never applied. He would sit in the back of the de-escalation seminars, arms crossed, checking his watch. In his mind, the complaints weren't indicators of his brutality. They were badges of honor, proof that he was doing the "5" that softer officers couldn't handle. He had survived 4 different police chiefs, protected by a union contract that made firing him nearly impossible, and a culture that mistook aggression for effectiveness. He believed he was untouchable. He believed he was the law. But on this humid July afternoon, the man he pulled over was not a college student, a grandfather, or a surgeon. Special Agent Marcus Thorne had spent the last 12 years in the shadows. A graduate of West Point and top of his class at Quantico, Thorne was a ghost. He had spent 4 years deep undercover dismantling a cartel distribution network in Arizona, living daily with a price on his head. He had tracked domestic terrorists through the backwoods of Idaho. Colleagues described him as meticulous to a fault. Supervisors called him relentless. He possessed a level of discipline that most people only see in movies. Thorne didn't just know the law, he enforced it at the highest level. He had prosecuted federal civil rights violations. He knew exactly what excessive force looked like because he had sent men to prison for it. On this specific day, Thorne was transitioning between assignments, moving sensitive surveillance equipment in an unmarked black Dodge Charger. He was tired, eager to see his 6-year-old daughter. But his mind was, as always, alert. He was driving 5 miles under the speed limit. His registration was current. His tint was legal. But to Sergeant Harris, who was parked in a speed trap on Elm Street, Thorne wasn't a federal agent. He was just a black man in a nice car in a neighborhood where Harris believed he didn't belong. Do you think police officers with more than 10 excessive force complaints should be automatically decertified? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. The scene was stifling. The temperature hovered around 96 degrees, with humidity that made the air feel like soup. The smell of melting asphalt and exhaust fumes hung heavy over the intersection. Heat waves shimmered off the hoods of passing cars. The sound of cicadas was a constant droning buzz, interrupted only by the sharp whoop-whoop of Harris's siren. Thorne checked his mirrors. He saw the flashing lights. He sighed, the fatigue of a double shift weighing on his eyelids, but his training took over instantly. He signaled, pulled over smoothly, lowered all 4 windows to show transparency, and placed his large hands at the 10 and 2 positions on the steering wheel. He knew the drill. He knew the dangers. Harris approached the vehicle not with the caution of a public servant, but with the swagger of a predator. He didn't check the trunk. He didn't scan the back seat. He marched directly to the driver's window, his hand already resting heavily on the grip of his Glock 17. "License and registration," Harris barked, dispensing with the greeting. Thorne didn't move his hands. He spoke calmly, his voice steady, a baritone honed in federal courtrooms. Quote 7. For a split second, the information hung in the hot air. A rational officer would have paused, asked for badge verification, or de-escalated. But Sergeant Harris didn't hear federal agent. His biases, cultivated over 2 decades of unchecked aggression, filtered the audio. All he heard was, "Gun." The reaction was Pavlovian. "Gun! Don't you move!" Harris screamed, ripping his weapon from its holster. The barrel leveled instantly at Thorne's temple through the open window. "I am not moving," Thorne said, his eyes locking onto the shaking barrel of the gun. He saw the officer's finger twitching on the trigger. He saw the dilated pupils, the sweat beading on Harris's upper lip. He recognized the look. It was the look of a man who had lost control of the situation and was looking for an excuse to explode. "I am identifying myself as law enforcement." "I don't care who you say you are. Hands! Let me see your hands." "My hands are on the wheel, Sergeant. If I move them, you might shoot. Tell me exactly what you want me to do." "Get out! Get out of the car now!" Harris stepped back, creating distance, but his aim didn't waver. Thorne calculated his odds. If he moved too fast, he died. If he stayed, he might die. Quote 16. Thorne opened the door with a slow, deliberate creak. The heat rushed into the air-conditioned cabin. He stepped onto the asphalt, raising his hands slowly, palms open. He stood 6'2", built like a linebacker, wearing a plain gray t-shirt and jeans, the standard uniform of the undercover agent. Quote 17. Harris was screaming now, his voice cracking. Passers-by were stopping. Smartphones were emerging from pockets, lenses trained on the scene. Thorne complied. He went to his knees on the burning pavement. Quote 18. Quote 19. Harris advanced, kicking Thorne's legs apart, forcing him flat onto his stomach. The gravel bit into Thorne's cheek. He felt the cold steel of handcuffs snap onto his wrists, tighter than necessary, pinching the nerve. Quote 20. Harris hissed into his ear, pressing a knee into Thorne's spine. Quote 21. Quote 22. Thorne said, his face pressed against the tar. Quote 23. The use of his first name froze Harris for a second. He reached into Thorne's front pocket, expecting a bag of drugs or a stolen ID. His fingers closed around a leather bifold. He yanked it out and flipped it open. The sunlight hit the gold shield. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Below it, the photo ID of Special Agent Marcus Thorne, security clearance level, top secret. The world should have stopped there. Harris should have uncuffed him immediately. But cognitive dissonance is a powerful drug. In Harris's mind, the puzzle he had assembled, the suspect, the threat, the arrest, could not be wrong. Therefore, the evidence had to be wrong. Quote 24. Harris muttered, tossing the badge onto the dashboard of the Charger. Quote 25. Quote 26. Thorne said, his voice dropping an octave. Quote 27. Quote 28. Quote 29. Thorne said, quote to 30. Harris paused. He looked at the Charger. No front plate. Rear plate was a generic government issue he hadn't bothered to check. He keyed his radio, his voice still pumped with adrenaline, but tinged with the first creeping frost of doubt. Dispatch. Run plate. Victor X-ray. 944. There was a long silence. Then, the dispatcher's voice came back, urgent and sharp. Unit 4 Alpha, that plate is flagged. It returns to a federal agency. DOJ hold. Do not detain. Repeat. Do not detain. Advise on status. Harris's face went white. The blood drained from his cheeks so fast it looked like he might faint. The hand holding the radio started to shake. Comment: Justice, if you believe qualified immunity should be abolished for officers who ignore standard verification procedures. Just then, a black SUV screeched to a halt behind the patrol car. Then another. Blue and red lights flooded the street, but these weren't backup for Harris. A man in a suit jumped out of the lead SUV. It was Assistant Special Agent in Charge, ASC David Miller, Thorne's direct supervisor. He had been tracking Thorne's location via the surveillance gear, and had heard the stop through the open comms line Thorne had subtly activated in the car. Miller didn't run. He stormed. Get him up! Get him up right now! Harris looked at the man in the suit, then down at Thorne, then back at the fake badge on the dashboard. The realization crashed into him like a freight train. This wasn't a suspect lying to get out of a ticket. This wasn't a misunderstanding he could smooth over with a union rep. This was a catastrophe. He had a gun. I didn't know, Harris stammered, his aggressive veneer crumbling into panic. Uncuff him, Miller roared, getting inches from Harris's face. Harris fumbled for his keys. His hands were trembling so violently he dropped them twice. The metallic clack of the keys hitting the pavement sounded like a gavel striking a sounding block. Thorne stood up as the cuffs were removed. He rubbed his wrists, grimacing. He didn't yell. He didn't strike back. He turned slowly to face Sergeant Harris. Thorne's expression wasn't angry. It was pitying, mixed with the cold resolve of a prosecutor preparing a closing argument. Quote 38. Thorne said, his voice calm, but carrying across the silent street. Quote 39. A St. Louis PD lieutenant had arrived on the scene, looking as if he wanted to be anywhere else in the universe. He knew Harris. He knew the complaints. He saw the FBI agents surrounding his officer. Quote 40. The lieutenant said softly. Quote 40. Quote 42. Harris tried one last desperate lie. Quote 43. The lieutenant said, taking Harris's Glock. Quote 44. By 8 p.m. that evening, the bystander video had hit Twitter. By midnight, it had 2.5 million views. The image of a uniformed officer pressing a knee into the back of a man who turned out to be a decorated federal agent shattered the internet. The public reaction was nuclear. The NAACP released a statement demanding immediate federal intervention. The Fraternal Order of Police, usually quick to defend their own, issued a rare, quote 45-5, distancing themselves from the radioactive fallout. The St. Louis Post-Dispatch ran the headline, quote 46, but the real action was happening in the legal arena. 3 days later, Marcus Thorne filed a federal lawsuit. It wasn't just a complaint, it was a 40-page indictment of the entire St. Louis Police Department. The plaintiff, Special Agent Marcus Thorne. The defendants, Sergeant Rick Harris, the City of St. Louis, and the Chief of Police. The charges: violation of Fourth Amendment rights, unlawful seizure, assault with a deadly weapon, deprivation of rights under color of law, and false imprisonment. The demand: $12,000. The lawsuit didn't just focus on the stop. Thorne's legal team subpoenaed Harris's entire disciplinary file. They exposed the 27 previous complaints. They deposed the supervisors who had signed off on the Yaos Quote 47. They built a case that argued the city of St. Louis knew Harris was a ticking time bomb and kept him on the street anyway. During the deposition, Harris was asked why he didn't believe Thorne's claim of being an agent. He didn't look like an agent, Harris mumbled. And what, Thorne's attorney asked, does an agent look like, Mr. Harris? Harris couldn't answer. The silence in the room was deafening. The city attorneys knew they couldn't win. A jury would destroy them. They settled in 14 months. $12,000 paid to Marcus Thorne. It was one of the largest individual settlements for police misconduct in the state's history. But for Rick Harris, the checkbook couldn't save him. The FBI doesn't take kindly to their agents being assaulted. The Department of Justice opened a criminal probe. Harris was indicted on federal civil rights charges. The video, the lack of probable cause, and the immediate escalation were damning. Harris's defense, that he feared for his life, crumbled when the body cam audio revealed Thorne's perfect compliance and calm identification. On a rainy Tuesday in November, Rick Harris stood before a federal judge. The swagger was gone. The uniform was gone, replaced by an orange jumpsuit. You betrayed the badge you wore, the judge said. You used the power of the state to terrorize a citizen who, ironically, has done more to protect this country than you ever will. The sentence: 8 years in federal prison. No parole. The aftermath: Harris was placed on the National Decertification Index, ensuring he could never work in law enforcement again, not even as a mall security guard. The fallout triggered massive reforms. The St. Louis PD implemented the Thorne Rule: automatic investigation by an independent civilian board after 5 complaints. Mandatory, simulation-based implicit bias training with a pass-fail metric. immediate termination for deactivating body cameras or failing to verify credentials. Marcus Thorne donated $2 million of his settlement to legal defense funds for those who had been stopped by Harris in the past but couldn't afford to fight back. He remained with the Bureau, a quiet legend among the ranks. Standing outside the courthouse after the sentencing, Thorne gave a statement that was broadcast across the nation. He adjusted his tie, looked directly into the cameras, and delivered the words that would echo for years. Quote 54-4. This wasn't just about one bad apple. It was about the orchard. It was about a system that allowed Rick Harris to operate for 23 years with impunity. It was about the culture that taught him to see a black man in a nice car as a threat rather than a peer. Marcus Thorne survived because he was trained to survive, but how many others didn't? If you believe these stories need to be told until the system changes, hit that subscribe button and share this video. Justice is not a passive act. It requires witnesses.